They thought my silence was weakness, my generosity given. They served me scraps from a table I had paid for. And when I finally acted, it wasn't with anger, but with the quiet, devastating precision of a promise being kept to myself. Nothing freezes a family faster than a bank account that suddenly stops. The first words I heard as I stepped through the grand, polished doors of the Lakewood Resort were not a greeting, but a challenge. "Are you here for the service staff entrance?" The question came from a young man in a stiff blazer, his name tag reading concierge, though his expression suggested gatekeeper. A sharp November breeze, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, followed me into the cavernous lobby, and I paused to regain my balance. In my left hand, I held a small, worn suitcase, its wheels having navigated the long gravel path from the parking lot. In my right, I carefully cradled my homemade walnut spice cake, still faintly warm and wrapped in a clean dish towel. The air inside was warm and thick, with the smell of wood smoke and expensive perfume. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered to help. They just stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. My sensible walking shoes, the ones that had carried me through decades of parent-teacher nights and grocery runs, felt clumsy and loud on the gleaming hardwood floor. I looked down at my gray cardigan, a comfortable friend against the autumn chill, and suddenly saw it through their eyes. Drab, old, out of place. I forced my chin up. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, my heart fluttering like a trapped bird against my ribs. "I'm the mother of the man who booked this place. Thomas Martin." The concierge raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. His gaze swept over me, a quick, dismissive inventory that lingered on the gentle lines etched around my eyes and mouth before returning to my simple attire. He shook his head with an air of practiced regret. "Oh, sorry, ma'am. You're just not listed on the guest roster for the Martin party." He tapped his screen with a long, manicured finger, a pantomime of diligence. I nodded slowly, a deep ache starting to bloom in my chest. I pretended it didn't hurt, the same way I had pretended for years. It was a familiar performance. "That's fine," I murmured, tucking my chin down to hide the tremor in my lip. To my left, half hidden by a large potted fern, I saw Ella, my grandson's girlfriend. She was leaning against the cool marble wall, scrolling through her phone. She had seen me. She had heard every single word of the humiliating exchange. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that moment I saw not a flicker of recognition or sympathy, only a glint of amusement. She quickly spun away, her shoulders shaking with swallowed laughter, as if my presence was nothing more than a private joke, a dull shadow that had wandered into their bright, exclusive world. The sting of it was sharper than the concierge's professional disdain. This was family, or what was supposed to pass for it. Moments later, Kelsey, my daughter-in-law, glided into the lobby. She moved with the effortless grace of someone who had never known a moment of self-doubt, dressed in luxurious silk pajamas that looked like they belonged in a high-end spa catalog. Her face was still adorned with jade eye patches, tiny green crescent moons beneath her eyes. Her lips were painted a muted rose, and her expression was as crisp and polished as the rest of her. She saw me standing there, a lone, gray island in a sea of opulence, and her face tightened almost imperceptibly. She stepped forward, slipping her cool, manicured hand into mine. It was not a gesture of affection, but of control, a subtle way of steering me, of managing me. "Helen, sweetie," she said, her voice a masterclass in manufactured warmth. "We already told you we're going for a modern vibe this year. No need for old-fashioned food or energy." Her eyes flickered to the cake in my hand, her expression one of polite distaste, as if I had brought a mud pie to a royal banquet. I swallowed against the lump forming in my throat, blinking at the surreal sight of the jade patches on her face. I baked a walnut spice cake, I managed my voice small. The one Thomas always loved at Thanksgiving. His favorite. She looked at the cake as if it were a fossil, a relic from a forgotten time. That's sweet, she said, the word utterly devoid of sweetness. Maybe just leave it in the staff fridge. The younger ones don't really eat dense food. Dense, I thought. Dense like my heart, heavy with things left unsaid. When I gathered the courage to ask where I would be staying, her response was bright and airy, a cheerful dismissal. Oh, we just assumed you'd share with the help. There's a pullout in the laundry cabin. It's separate from the main lodge, so you'll have your privacy. The words hung in the air between us. Laundry cabin. I steadied myself against a wave of dizziness, my hand tightening on my suitcase handle. We just thought, well, it'll be cozy, she continued, oblivious or indifferent to my shock. And you're just here for one night, right? The big dinner is tonight. Only for the weekend, I corrected silently, but I couldn't find the words. I fought to keep my voice steady, to keep the tears from welling. Just then, I heard my granddaughter Ivy's voice, a stage whisper to her college friend who stood beside her, both of them looking impossibly young and chic. Grandma's staying here? That's such a mood killer. Ivy whispered, not bothering to hide her smirk. She's going to start talking about how we used to peel potatoes by hand in the blizzard of '74 again. They shared a look of mutual suffering and turned away, their laughter a light, tinkling sound that felt like shards of glass in my ears. It was then that my son, Thomas, finally appeared. He came up behind me, his presence a familiar weight that once meant comfort, but now felt like an accusation. He crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze flicking from Ivy and her friend to Kelsey. Then finally to me. There was no warmth in his eyes, only weary impatience. He leaned in and pressed a dry, fleeting kiss to my temple. His whisper was for me alone, a quick, sharp command. Mom, don't make a scene. You're just here for one meal. Please don't ruin it like you ruined Dad's funeral. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't look me in the eye. He simply walked away, giving a brief, approving nod to Kelsey, who then took my arm and began to lead me away from the Grand Lodge toward the path that led to the service cabins. I stood silent, my feet feeling as though they were rooted to the floor. I did not say one word about my feelings. I did not demand respect. I did not argue. I just let her lead me, the walnut spice cake growing heavier in my hand, a useless offering of a love they no longer wanted. For 33 years, I was someone people listened to. As an English teacher at the local high school, my classroom was a sanctuary of words and ideas. I spent my days helping struggling students find their voice, teaching them how to structure a sentence, how to build an argument, how to write their first coherent paragraph. I stayed late grading essays under the hum of fluorescent lights, ran the after-school drama club, and navigated the delicate diplomacy of parent-teacher nights. I built a home for my husband, Mark, and our son, Thomas, that was clean, warm, and always full of music. We didn't have much in those early years, but what we had was solid. We had enough, and we had a deep, unwavering love that felt like the sturdiest thing in the world. Then cancer came. It arrived not like a storm with a warning, but like an unexpected winter, brutal, unrelenting, and colder than any Indiana wind that had ever rattled our windows. Mark's diagnosis was late, the prognosis grim. The 2 years that followed were a blur of hospital corridors, the sterile scent of antiseptic, and the quiet hum of machines. I spent the better part of my days driving him to chemotherapy appointments, fighting with insurance companies on the phone until my voice was raw, and learning to juggle a dizzying array of prescriptions. I became an expert in pain management, in dosages, in the subtle signs of a good day versus a bad one. At 3 a.m, I would be awake, wiping sweat from his brow as he shivered with fever, his voice a frail whisper as he asked if dying would hurt. To cover a hospital bill the insurance refused, I sold my diamond engagement ring. The one Mark had slipped on my finger on a park bench so many years ago. I canceled the retirement cruise we had saved for, a trip we had dreamed of for a decade. My world shrank to the size of our small living room, and I learned to live on soup and toast, my own needs an afterthought. When he passed, it was quietly in our own living room on a Tuesday morning, the sunlight streaming through the window just as it always had. I didn't cry right away. The grief was too vast, a hollow space that seemed to absorb all sound, all feeling. I just sat beside him, holding his hand until it grew cold, and made him a promise. "I'll take care of our boy," I whispered to the stillness. "Even if he's a man now, even if he forgets to look back." At the time, Thomas was already married to Kelsey. They lived 3 hours away in a shiny new subdivision where all the houses looked like they had been printed from the same master file, each one perfect and impersonal. After Mark was gone, the silence in my house became unbearable. I thought that if I moved closer to them, we could become what families are supposed to be, a source of comfort, of connection. So I packed up the life Mark and I had built, sold our home, and bought a modest condo just a 15-minute drive from their sprawling house. I brought them pies. I offered to babysit Ivy. Kelsey would always smile politely, a perfect, practiced expression, and say, "We're good, Helen, but thank you," before disappearing behind her gleaming glass front door. Still, I believed. I believed that proximity would eventually build a bridge. The bridge, it turned out, was one I would have to finance myself. The idea came to Thomas one afternoon over coffee at a chain restaurant. "It's what I've always wanted to do, Mom," he told me, his eyes alight with a passion I hadn't seen in years. A restaurant, a brunch place, classy but accessible. Mimosas, avocado toast, the works. Kelsey's got a branding background, and I've got the concept. The bank didn't approve our financing. He trailed off, stirring his coffee with a clatter. I listened, my heart swelling with a mother's instinct to help, to fix, to provide. I nodded, and then I did what mothers do. I stepped in. Thomas's credit score, a consequence of youthful indiscretions and poor planning, was dismal. Kelsey, with her student loan debt, didn't qualify for a business loan on her own. But I had savings painstakingly accumulated over decades of frugal living. I had the equity in my new condo. I had the inheritance my sister had left me. I had enough. I was enough. I could co-sign. I could be listed as the financial guarantor. I could carry the weight they weren't yet ready to hold. "I don't want ownership," I told them, a genuine offer I thought was generous. "I don't need my name on the door. Just let me help you get started." Thomas hugged me, so tight it took my breath away. Kelsey called me a lifesaver, her eyes shining with gratitude. The very next day, I went to the bank and transferred over the first $120,000. They opened the restaurant, naming it Oak and Willow 6 months later. It was an instant success. The first Sunday, there was a line out the door before they even opened. Local papers and lifestyle magazines featured them in glossy spreads. "Young couple brings big city brunch vibe to small town Indiana." They smiled in every photograph, Kelsey in a stylish dress, Thomas with his arm wrapped proudly around her. My name, the one that had made it all possible, was never mentioned. At first, I didn't mind. I convinced myself it was about them, not me. Their success was my success. But slowly, things began to shift in ways that were subtle but sharp. I'd walk into the restaurant during a slow afternoon just to say hello, and Kelsey would look up, startled, as though I were an auditor who had walked in unannounced. "Helen, we weren't expecting you today," she'd say, even if I had texted ahead. "I just wanted to see how things were going." I'd reply, "We're good, really good," she would say, her smile tight. but we're also really, really busy. Soon, they stopped inviting me to staff meetings, explaining that it created too much pressure for the younger employees to have family dynamics in the mix. When the restaurant was successful enough to expand to a second location, they formed an LLC without me. I thought we agreed. I started to say one evening, my voice trailing off as Kelsey interrupted. "It's just cleaner this way, Helen, from a legal standpoint," she said, her tone brisk and businesslike. "No offense, but your name on the official paperwork just complicates things." My name, the one they had needed so desperately to get the loan, the one that was still guaranteeing their entire enterprise. I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. But the worst part wasn't the deliberate exclusion. It was the encroaching, deafening silence. The phone calls stopped unless they needed something. No one came by my condo for a casual visit anymore. I received Christmas cards signed with a generic, printed, "Love the Thompsons," without so much as a handwritten note inside. The only time my phone buzzed with a message from Thomas, it was an urgent, impersonal request. "Hey, Mom, quick question. Do you still have the login for the utility account? Or, sorry to bother you, but can you wire the quarterly tax payment? The link is below." One time, I didn't respond right away, and he texted twice more within 30 minutes, his final message sharp with impatience. "Mom, I just don't want to miss a deadline." There was no, "How are you, Mom?" No preamble. Just the raw urgency of someone accustomed to me being constantly available, a 24/7 customer service line that never closes. From a distance, I watched them grow. I saw their home fill with expensive new furniture. Their vacations became longer and more exotic. Their Instagram photos grew glossier, a curated feed of success and happiness. And every time I saw their smiling faces in some article or on a promotional flyer for their growing brand, a small, cold part of me wondered how two people I once loved so fiercely, the two people who were my entire world, could look so complete, so triumphant, without me in the picture. But I never said a word. I just smiled when they needed me, wrote the checks when they asked, and reminded myself that love, real love, is patient. But I was beginning to learn a hard lesson. Even the most patient heart can be taught how to close its doors. I woke early on the Friday of Thanksgiving weekend, long before the sun had begun to lighten the sky. An old ache in my knees reminded me of the coming cold, but a new, steely resolve had settled in my heart after the cold reception the day before. After being relegated to the laundry cabin, I had promised myself I would bring something to this family gathering that truly mattered, something more than a checkbook or a signature on a loan document. I would bring a piece of our history, a taste of a time when we were a family. So I rose at 5 in the chilly cabin and made my stuffing. It wasn't the boxed kind, and it wasn't the trendy cornbread chorizo nonsense they featured on the Food Network. Mine was a pumpkin stuffing with fresh rosemary, sweet Vidalia onion, and small, savory bits of sage sausage browned to perfection. It was a recipe passed down from my grandmother, who had perfected it during the Depression, a time when a simple, hearty dish could fill a belly and warm a soul when little else could. I had the recipe written out on a yellowing index card, its corners softened with age, tucked safely within the pages of my Bible. I brought the stuffing to the resort's main kitchen in a deep glass Pyrex dish, still warm from the oven, its top a perfect golden brown and crisp. I had wrapped it carefully in a thick towel, carrying it like an offering, a fragile peace treaty. The kitchen was a chaotic whirlwind of stainless steel, clanging pots, and rushing staff. No one greeted me. "Just leave any outside food there," a young server said without looking up, pointing a thumb toward a steel prep table already crowded with supplies. "The chef will sort it out." My heart sank. "I brought it for the family meal," I said, my voice barely audible over the din shore. She muttered, already distracted by a new order ticket. I placed the heavy dish down as carefully as I could, a small, homespun island in an ocean of professional catering trays. I smoothed the towel over it one last time and turned back toward the dining room, feeling foolish and out of place. Later that afternoon, as I was pouring myself a glass of water from a dispenser set up at a side table behind the main dining area, I heard Ivy's familiar laugh. She was sitting with her friend at one of the beautifully set tables, scrolling through her phone. "Oh my God, Grandma still thinks we eat food from the dust bowl," she said, loud enough for me to hear clearly. Her friend smirked. "That's so her. She probably thinks pumpkin is still a vegetable, not like a vibe." Their laughter followed me as I retreated to my corner. I turned, a sharp retort on the tip of my tongue, wanting to tell them about their great-grandmother, about history, about what it means to create something with your hands. But I stayed quiet. I bit back the words and reminded myself of my purpose: to be kind, to be gracious, to be invisible if necessary, but always kind. The family bustled around the main room, setting up elaborate centerpieces of autumn flowers and gourds. Someone popped a bottle of champagne, and a round of mimosas was ordered. A little while later, a gnawing worry led me back toward the kitchen just to check on my dish. That is when I saw it. A different server, a tall, bearded young man, maybe 22, was carrying my Pyrex dish in both hands. The dish towel was gone. The stuffing inside had been scooped from only once, a single serving taken, and the rest had been left to sit, growing cold and congealed. He walked briskly to a large, industrial-sized trash bin hidden behind a partition wall near the kitchen exit. Without a second glance, without any hesitation, he tilted the heavy glass dish and scraped its entire contents, my grandmother's recipe, my morning's work, my offering of love, straight into the garbage among the coffee grounds and vegetable peels. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. He looked up and saw me, his eyes widening in momentary surprise. "Oh, sorry," he said, not with apology but with a hint of annoyance. "Didn't know anyone still wanted this." Before I could open my mouth to form a single word, he had turned and walked away, disappearing back into the kitchen's chaos. There was no real apology, no acknowledgement of what he had just done, just food wasted, and a memory, a piece of my heart, trashed along with it. I didn't say a word, not to him, not to Kelsey, not to anyone. I walked back to the corner of the vast room where they had placed my chair. It was a single lonely seat next to the drink dispensers, tucked behind a large floral arch, far from the magnificent long oak table where the rest of the family would sit, overlooking the serene, wintry lake. There was no elegant, calligraphed place card for me, as there was for everyone else. Someone had taken a yellow sticky note and scrawled "Helen" on it, the writing shaky, done in what looked like eyeliner pencil. From that solitary vantage point, I watched them gather. Kelsey had changed into a floor-length emerald green dress, looking as if she were attending a Hollywood gala. Thomas wore a crisp new shirt that still had the faint crease from its packaging, a tiny plastic tag string still tucked into the collar at the back. Ivy was shimmering in gold, Ella in deep crimson velvet. They were all shining, polished, perfect, like a family cast in a television commercial for wealth and happiness. They raised their champagne glasses to each other. The master of ceremonies, a man I didn't recognize, probably one of Kelsey's slick marketing friends with perfect teeth and no depth behind his smile, stepped up to a microphone. "Tonight, we celebrate legacy," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "And we begin by honoring those who built this family. Let us hear from the pillars, the ones who matter most." A few scattered claps rippled through the guests. Ivy spoke first, talking about her new internship and her ambitions for the future. Thomas followed, delivering a glowing monologue about perseverance, growth, and the importance of a forward-thinking vision. Then, my body moved before my mind could stop it. I stood up. I wasn't planning to speak, but the humiliation had built a pressure inside me that had to be released. The microphone was just 2 seats away when Kelsey intercepted it. She turned to me, her smile a beautiful, terrifying mask of steel. "Not you, Helen," she said, her voice low but carrying with perfect clarity in the suddenly hushed room. "This isn't your moment." Heads turned. Conversations faltered. A few guests gasped, their eyes wide with uncertainty, unsure of the domestic drama unfolding before them. But no one stepped in. No one spoke up for me. I looked across the table at my son, my only child, and his eyes met mine for a fleeting, agonizing second before he looked away, studying the intricate pattern of the wood grain on the table as if it were the most fascinating thing he had ever seen. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice caught in my throat, a strangled, pathetic sound. "Please," Kelsey said, her smile never wavering, her grip tight on the microphone. "Let's not turn a beautiful celebration into a therapy session." I sank back into my chair, the motion jerky and clumsy. I swallowed the thick knot of grief and rage. I did not cry. The silence inside me was no longer a quiet, patient thing. It was roaring. Then came the cake. Not my simple walnut spice cake, of course, but a magnificent, 3-tiered confection wheeled out on a silver cart, adorned with sparklers and fanfare. It was a masterpiece of dark marble chocolate and raspberry cream. Frosted words in elegant curling script read, "To the family that built this." I scanned the names piped in delicate chocolate along the base. Thomas, Kelsey, Ivy, their names were all there. Mine was absent. Thomas took the microphone one last time, his arm around Kelsey's waist. "We built this together," he declared, his voice ringing with pride. "Through hard work, trust, and vision." He glanced across the room, his gaze sweeping somewhere past me, as if I were a piece of furniture. He added, his voice dripping with significance, and certainly not because of old ghosts from the past weighing us down. There it was again. Ghost. Not mother. Not grandmother. Not teacher. Not investor. Not matriarch. Ghost. I looked at the extravagant cake, at the champagne bubbles rising in their flutes, at the guests clapping politely. I looked at my son, at the woman he had chosen, at the glittering empire they believed they had built all on their own. And then a strange thing happened. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy or defeat. It was a smile of pure, cold knowledge, because the LLC papers, the operating account for the new brunch expansion, the massive line of credit that made this entire lavish celebration possible, all of it still had one thing in common. My name, my signature, my protection, and I had just remembered that while ghosts may be quiet, they do not forget. That night, I sat alone on the lumpy pull-out cot in the laundry cabin. The walls were thin, and I could hear the rhythmic thumping of industrial dryers from the adjacent room. The bedding was stiff and smelled of institutional bleach, and the small electric heater in the corner clicked and whirred like an old watch losing time. But I didn't feel cold anymore. The chill that had settled deep in my bones over the past 2 days had been replaced by something else, something sharper than betrayal and more powerful than self-pity. I opened my laptop, the same old Lenovo that Thomas had once bought me for Mother's Day, back when he still remembered such holidays. The screen flickered to life, illuminating my face in its pale blue light. With steady fingers, I clicked through folders I hadn't opened in months, maybe even years. And then I found it, the operating agreement for the Oak and Willow Hospitality Group. My name was there, in bold type at the top of the 3rd page. Helen L. Martin, primary financial backer. And below it, nestled in a paragraph of dense legal text, was the clause, the one Thomas had skimmed over, the one he had begged me to agree to, assuring me it was just a formality, Mom, standard stuff. I had nodded at the time, my heart full of trust, my mind on helping my son achieve his dream. Now, the words on the screen seemed to glow with a newfound significance. It read, "The guarantor retains full discretionary right to revoke all financial sponsorship and endorsement in documented cases of financial misconduct, identity misrepresentation, or evidence of psychological or emotional harm induced by any primary party within the corporation." Back then, I hadn't thought much of it. I was too busy wiring funds, meeting with real estate agents, and assuring stern-faced bank managers that my name, my reputation, my assets meant something. I believed with every fiber of my being that I was doing what a mother should do, clearing paths, building foundations, holding the heavy weight so her child could climb higher. But sitting there in that cold, sterile room, with the distant sound of their party laughter still echoing faintly from the main lodge, I finally understood what I had really done. I had handed them the keys to a castle I had built. I had paid all the tolls, opened all the gates, and then they had locked the doors from the inside, leaving me out in the cold. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I clicked through my email archives, searching for one message in particular. It didn't take long to find. The email was dated 3 years ago. The subject line read, "Thank you, Mom. This means everything." I opened it, my breath catching in my chest. "Mom," it began, "thank you for believing in me. I know our family has been through a lot, and I know Dad would be so proud of this next step we're taking. I promise I'll never make you regret standing behind me. You're more than my mom. You're my foundation." I read the email twice, then a third time. Each word, once a source of deep maternal pride, now sounded hollow like lines from a well-rehearsed play. It wasn't love. It wasn't gratitude. It was just another script performed for the convenience of the moment. Attached to that email was the signed digital document for the first capital investment transfer, $120,000. It was followed by documentation of 3 more large deposits over the following 18 months. I scrolled further down through my files, my search now more focused, more determined. I found a PDF labeled Partnership Agreement, Flagship Expansion. I clicked it open. There it was, the brunch project they had toasted tonight, the one with the ostentatious cake and the self-congratulatory speeches, the one with no mention of me. The agreement stated with terrifying clarity that the new venture's operating capital was underwritten by an umbrella line of credit, a massive sum secured by my personal financial assets, my retirement fund, the equity in my condo, my entire estate. I stared at the line until the words blurred. Secured by the personal collateral and legal goodwill of Helen L. Martin. Legal goodwill. I had offered them every last drop of my name's value, my life's work, my security. And now I could finally take it back. My cursor hovered over the digital copy of the agreement, over Clause 14.3, Revocation of Financial Endorsement. All I needed was documentation of emotional harm. My chest tightened, not with anxiety, but with a strange, cold certainty. I reached into my suitcase and pulled out the small notebook where I kept odd bits of paper and personal notes. Tucked inside, between a grocery list and a pharmacy receipt, was a slip of paper I had nearly thrown away. It was a printed page from a group text accidentally mailed to me along with a promotional flyer from their restaurant weeks before Thanksgiving. It was a conversation between Kelsey, Ivy, and Thomas. "Just make sure she stays out of the way this year." Kelsey had written, "I'm not dealing with her crying or her weird, sad traditions again." Ivy had replied instantly, "LOL moms, just the wallet with a wig." Kelsey's response came a second later, "No wig, just bad hair and opinions." Thomas hadn't replied, but his silence, his failure to object, was its own damning response. I scanned the printout into my computer. Then I reached for my phone and found the voicemail from just a week prior, when Thomas had called late one night. It wasn't to say hello, not to check on me. "Hey, Mom, His voice began, rushed and impersonal. "We need to add your name to a new investor presentation. Just for credibility, you know? Not for actual input or anything. Don't overthink it, okay?" Not actual input. I saved the audio file to my desktop. Then, with a clarity that felt almost serene, I opened a new document and began to type, "To whom it may concern. In accordance with Clause 14.3 of the Oak and Willow Hospitality Group Financial Agreement, I, Helen L. Martin, am formally submitting my intention to revoke all sponsorship, endorsement, and financial backing of the entity and its affiliates, effective immediately. This revocation is based on documented grounds of sustained emotional mistreatment, intentional misrepresentation of my financial and foundational involvement, and psychological harm, evidenced through electronic and written communication. All use of my name, identity, or financial standing in any promotion, guarantee, or legal agreement is henceforth unauthorized and must cease. Please see attached evidence for reference. Respectfully, Helen L. Martin." I attached the scanned group text. I attached the voicemail audio file. I attached the email from Thomas where he called me his foundation. Finally, I attached a photograph I had taken earlier that day with my phone, the pathetic, hand-scrawled sticky note with my name on it, taped to the wall beside the soda dispenser. A stark contrast to the shimmering golden plates and elaborate floral runners of the main table. I didn't send the email. Not yet. I saved the draft and all the attachments to my desktop, creating a new folder. I titled it, "For When the Cake Crumbles." Then I shut the laptop, leaned back against the thin pillows on the creaking cot, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. My fingers were steady. My breath was slow and even. I felt neither vengeance nor rage, just a profound and chilling clarity. They could toast themselves in public. They could praise each other in self-serving speeches. They could pretend I had never built the very table they now danced upon. But I had the receipts. I had the name they needed, and I had the power they had so carelessly forgotten I possessed. I held the key I had once given them so freely, and I was about to find out if I had the strength to take it back. By morning, I no longer felt like a discarded guest. I felt like an accountant, holding a ledger that was long overdue. When morning finally broke, the rest of the family had already departed for their scheduled activities, spa appointments, and a private boat tour Thomas had arranged as a Thanksgiving detox. I remained behind in the laundry cabin. The air was thick with the clean, sharp smell of bleach, and the rhythmic hum of the machines was a strangely comforting sound. It suited my purpose. I needed silence and focus for what I was about to do. I opened my laptop on the small, rickety table, took a deep, steadying breath, and reviewed everything one last time. The clause in the contract, the folder of evidence, the drafted letter. My resolve had not wavered in the quiet hours of the night. It had solidified, hardened into something unbreakable. I opened a new email, this one addressed to the Commercial Banking Division of Lakeshore Trust. The subject line was direct and unambiguous. Immediate revocation of financial endorsement, OAK and Willow Hospitality Group, Project XYZ. I wrote slowly, choosing each word with deliberate intention. To whom it may concern. This letter serves as formal notice to revoke all financial support, sponsorship, and personal endorsement related to the project known as the Oak and Willow Brunch Expansion, Project Code, XYZ. This revocation includes, but is not limited to, any and all lines of credit, lease agreements, and vendor accounts that have been established in association with my legal and financial identity. Effective immediately, I withdraw all authorization for the use of my name, personal assets, or financial reputation as security or collateral for this entity and any of its affiliates. The basis for this revocation includes a pattern of deliberate misrepresentation of my foundational involvement in corporate governance, sustained emotional and psychological mistreatment by the primary affiliated individuals, and the clear exploitation of familial ties for deceptive financial gain. Then I began attaching the files, the digital proof of my invisible wounds. The first attachment was an audio file. It was short, less than 10 seconds long, but it was as sharp and cutting as a shard of glass. It was Kelsey's voice, flippant and cruel, recorded during one of their staff meetings weeks ago. A young hostess, a kind girl who had been raised to respect her elders, had overheard the conversation and had been so appalled that she had discreetly recorded it and sent it to me. "She's just the checkbook with wrinkles," Kelsey's voice said, followed by a light laugh. "She won't say no. She never does." The second attachment was a video clip, a blurry recording taken on a cell phone by one of the kitchen staff on Thanksgiving. It showed me sitting alone at the small folding table behind the wine cooler, quietly chewing on a piece of cold turkey while the rest of the family dined under crystal chandeliers in the distance. The final attachment was a still photograph, my pumpkin stuffing, the dish still bearing my name scribbled on a piece of masking tape, being unceremoniously dumped into a garbage bin mid-shift. The timestamp on the photo matched Thanksgiving afternoon. All three pieces of evidence were ugly, humiliating, and undeniable. None of them were lies. I ended the email with a simple, powerful truth. I trusted my family to honor my name. Instead, they used it as a tool and then discarded it. I am no longer their guarantor. Respectfully, Helen L. Martin. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the mouse. Then, with a final, deep breath, I clicked send. The response was swift. Within the hour, I received an automated confirmation that my message had been received and flagged for urgent review. A compliance officer, the email stated, would be in contact with me shortly. 20 minutes after that, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Martin, a professional, calm voice asked, "This is Amy Travers from the Legal Compliance Department at Lakeshore Trust. We have received and reviewed your email and the accompanying documentation." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling on the other end. "Based on the evidence you have provided and the specific terms outlined in Clause 14.3 of your original guarantor agreement, we have initiated an immediate suspension of all financial activity tied to Project XYZ and its subsidiaries. The accounts are now frozen, pending a full internal review and legal evaluation." She paused again, her tone shifting slightly. "I have to ask, ma'am, do you anticipate that your family will contest this decision?" I looked out the small window of the cabin at the gray, unforgiving sky. "I expect they'll be furious," I answered, my voice even in calm. "But I also expect they won't be able to find a single lie in anything I've said." There was a moment of respectful silence on the other end of the line. "Well, then," Miss Travers said, finally, her voice imbued with a new warmth, "you've handled this with remarkable clarity, Mrs. Martin. We will be in touch." I ended the call. No emotion showed on my face. I didn't smile in triumph. I didn't cry in relief. But deep inside, in a place that had felt cold and hollow for years, I felt the first taste of a different kind of warmth. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't revenge. It was something truer, something purer. It was the feeling of justice. Let them sip their champagne on their rented boat. Let them sail around the lake, drunk on their manufactured joy. Because when they returned to shore, they would find out what it truly felt like when the tap runs dry, and the faucet they had never bothered to thank was gone for good. It did not take long for the foundations to crack. By Sunday morning, the aftershocks of my decision began to ripple outwards. I was sitting in the comfortable armchair by the window of my own condo, a warm mug of black tea cupped in my hands, watching the last of the autumn leaves fall from the maple tree in the parking lot. My phone, sitting on the end table beside me, buzzed once, then twice, a third time. It was Thomas. I ignored it. I had already said everything that needed to be said in my email to the bank. Let silence be my answer to him now. But by the afternoon, the silence had erupted into noise. An unexpected text message appeared on my phone from my neighbor's teenage daughter, a girl I occasionally paid to water my plants. It was clearly an accidental message, meant for a friend, with a link to a TikTok video attached. The caption read, "Bitter brunch, baby. Hot beverage, loudly crying face when you work a 14-hour holiday shift and your paycheck bounces because your boss is," and Mile finally snapped. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked the link. The video opened on a young waitress, still in her oak and willow uniform, sitting on a curb outside the now-closed restaurant. She held an empty coffee cup and looked exhausted and exasperated. "So, get this," she said to the camera, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "The accounts are frozen. All of them. Apparently, Grandma funded the entire operation, and she got sick of being treated like a piece of antique furniture. So she pulled the plug. Now none of us get paid until the lawyers sort it out. Happy Thanksgiving, I guess." The video was short, but the comments below it were rolling in fast. "Good for her," one read. "That's what happens when you forget who holds the purse strings." Another said, "I want to meet this grandma. She's my hero." I watched the video twice, a surreal feeling washing over me. My private life, my deepest pain, had been reduced to pixels and punchlines broadcast for the world to see. But I did not flinch. This was not the revenge I had sought, but it was a revelation. In their world, I had been invisible. But now I was being seen, if not by my own family, then by a world of strangers who, for some reason, seemed to understand. An hour later, Thomas called again. This time, I knew I had to answer. His name lit up my screen, stark and demanding. I let it ring once, twice, a small act of defiance. Then I answered. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" he snapped, his voice raw and ragged, skipping even the pretense of a greeting. "You ruined everything." There was no trace of the gentle boy I had raised, no softness in his tone, only raw panic wrapped in a thick blanket of entitlement. I revoked my financial sponsorship. I said quietly, my voice as calm as a placid lake, as was my legal right. "You're right. Do you even know what that means?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Payroll didn't go through. Our main food supplier just pulled our account. The expansion team is threatening to sue us for breach of contract." In the background, I could hear Kelsey's voice, high-pitched and frantic, followed by the distinct sound of a door slamming and something shattering. "You didn't just freeze some money, Mom," he seethed. "You killed a brand. Our brand." A strange, quiet calm washed over me, a sense of detachment that felt like a shield. "No, Thomas," I said, my voice gentle but firm. I just stopped pretending that I wasn't the one holding it all together. He was silent for a second, the sound of his ragged breathing filling the void. Then he scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This is insane. This is completely insane. You're punishing us because you didn't get a good enough seat at dinner." "No," I said, my voice dropping even lower, imbued with a clarity that cut through his panic. "I'm holding you accountable because you forgot that I was never just a guest at your table. I was the one who built the table." He muttered something under his breath, a curse I couldn't quite make out. Then he raised his voice again, a last, desperate plea. "This isn't how families are supposed to work, Mom." A sad, ironic smile touched my lips. "I agree, Thomas," I said softly. "Families do not lie to each other. They do not exclude and humiliate each other. and they certainly do not use one another as stepping stones, and then kick them away once they've reached the top. The line was quiet again, the silence stretching on, thick with everything that had been broken between us. Then he hung up. I sat there for a long time, the tea gone cold in my hand, and stared out the window as the sun began to set, painting the gray sky in shades of orange and pink. The emails started to arrive next, a digital floodgate opening. Messages from investors I had never met, anxious notes from business partners, and finally, a polite but persistent inquiry from a local food journalist who had picked up the story and wanted a quote. Apparently, the brunch chain that had redefined small-town hospitality was now the subject of a major financial investigation. And the quiet, invisible woman who had once paid for everyone else's dreams was, at last, the one everyone wanted to hear from. I didn't give any statements. I didn't post any videos. I simply watched as the beautiful, glittering thing they had built without me began to crumble under the weight of everything they had tried to bury. Not because I had pushed it over, but because I had finally stepped aside and let the truth, in all its unforgiving gravity, come through. The conference room at Lakeshore Trust was cold and sterile, a characterless space that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner, paper, and rising panic. I had not dressed to impress. I wore a simple gray cashmere sweater, a pair of well-tailored black slacks, and the small silver locket Mark had given me on our 15th wedding anniversary. It rested against my chest, a solid, comforting weight. I hadn't come to fight or to flaunt. I had come to finalize. At the far end of the long, polished table sat two men in dark, expensive suits, senior representatives from the bank. My attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davidson with a quiet voice and a ruthless command of paperwork, sat to my right. Across from us, looking small and defeated in the cavernous room, sat Thomas and Kelsey. Their faces were pale and drawn, etched with sleepless nights. Kelsey's usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, tight bun, and Thomas couldn't stop fiddling with a pen, clicking it open and shut as if the repetitive motion might somehow save him from drowning. Mrs. Martin began Mr. Covington, the senior banker, his eyes glancing at the thick stack of documents in front of him. "We have thoroughly reviewed your revocation request and the supporting evidence. Before we move forward with the permanent dissolution of the guarantor agreement, we are legally obligated to provide the named parties a final chance to respond." I nodded, my hands resting calmly in my lap. "Of course." Thomas leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, his knuckles white. "Mom, this has all gotten way out of hand. Can we just please?" I raised my hand, a small, simple gesture that somehow commanded the entire room's attention. "Please," I said softly, my voice calm but unyielding. "Let me speak first." The room fell silent. I pulled a manila folder from my bag and laid it flat on the table between us. Inside were neatly printed screenshots of the text messages, notarized transcriptions of the voicemails, and a high-resolution, glossy 8x10 print of the photograph I had taken, me sitting alone behind the kitchen door with a paper plate of discarded turkey on my lap. They took my name off the guest list. I said, my voice perfectly even, my eyes locked on Thomas. "So, I took their names off the account." Kelsey let out a sharp, ragged breath, a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "That's not fair. You know, that night was just—" I turned my steady gaze to her. I raised a hand to gently cut her off. "No one forced you to exclude me from your family's celebration. No one instructed you to have my food, which I made with my own hands, thrown into the trash. And no one," I added, my voice dropping slightly, "told you to refer to me as a checkbook with wrinkles." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the banker's faces twitch, a flicker of emotion he quickly suppressed. "I gave you my name I continued, my gaze sweeping back to my son. I gave you my life savings. I signed over my retirement funds, the equity in my home, even the emergency fund I kept for dental work. I gave you everything I had, all so you could build something you told me would carry our family's legacy forward. Kelsey found her voice again, though it was trembling now, laced with desperation. We were stressed, Helen. We were hosting a huge event. We didn't mean to be cruel. I turned to her, my expression not of anger, but of profound, sorrowful clarity. You served me cold food, I said, each word landing with quiet precision. I served you consequences. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, her eyes filling with tears she couldn't hold back. Mr. Covington cleared his throat, the sound loud in the tense silence. Legally, he stated, his tone all business, Mrs. Martin retains the full and undisputed right to revoke her support if the conditions outlined in the agreement are violated. Based on the extensive documentation provided, it is the bank's official position that this standard has been unequivocally met. Miss Davidson, my lawyer, spoke for the first time, and due to the personal nature of the mistreatment and the subsequent public exposure, she added, her voice cool and sharp, we are also formally requesting a legal restraining order preventing any further use of Mrs. Martin's name or likeness in any past, present, or future promotional materials associated with the principals of the Oak and Willow Group. Thomas finally snapped. He slammed the pen down on the table with a loud crack. So that's it? You just get to blow up our entire lives and walk away like nothing happened. I looked at him, then really looked at him, searching for a trace of the boy I had raised, the child who had once cried for an hour when his father couldn't make it to his first baseball game. I searched for the young man who used to bring me wildflowers he'd picked from the side of the road. But that boy was gone. In his place sat a bitter, entitled stranger. No, Thomas, I said, my voice soft with a grief he would never understand. I didn't blow anything up. I just stopped standing under the beams while you two chipped away at the foundation. He turned to Kelsey, his face a mask of disbelief, whispering, say something. She just shook her head, looking more like a fragile shell than a woman. In her eyes, I could finally see it, the dawning, horrific understanding of what she had truly lost. It wasn't just the money. It was the protection, the shield, the silent, unwavering approval of the one woman who had made their entire kingdom possible. I'm not angry, I said to them both, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I'm not here for vengeance. I am here to reclaim what I gave in good faith and what I received back in humiliation. Mr. Covington nodded curtly, shuffling the papers together into a neat pile. We will move forward with the permanent account freeze. All associated lines of credit are hereby suspended. The secured assets will remain locked until a new approved guarantor is found and Mrs. Martin's name is legally and irrevocably removed from all existing contracts. Miss Davidson gathered her files and stood. I did the same. But before I could reach the door, Kelsey stood too, her chair scraping against the floor. Please, she said, her eyes wet and red-rimmed. Helen, please. That night, it was a mistake. We were overwhelmed. I never meant. I paused at the door and looked back at her crumpled, expensive dress, and her tear-streaked face. You meant it, I said, not with malice, but with the simple finality of the truth. You just didn't think it would ever cost you anything. And then I walked out of that cold, sterile room. Not into anger, but into a profound and quiet peace. The peace of someone who knew her silence had finally spoken louder and more clearly than any scream.